Welcome to the Cleardown Show. I'm your host, Dr. G, with a PhD. Before we get started, remember guys, tell your friends about this show, and please like and subscribe on this episode. It really helps with the YouTube algorithms. If you like the thumbnail art, you can check it out on a much higher resolution on Instagram. And remember, leave any questions you might have throughout the week. And on the last episode of the week, I will be answering the questions in a mailbag. Hope everyone's having a great start to the week. We are one day late because there was some news that broke yesterday, and I wanted to read it and make sure I got it all right before reporting on it. And I finished that this morning, so that's why the delay happened. We'll start today off with one mailbag question. Then we're going to go straight to Canada. We're going to cover a whole bunch of things happening in Canada that happened over the weekend and the end of last week. Then we'll do a quick clip from Bill Gates and see what he has to say on COVID-19. From there, we'll look at Biden's extending of the emergency status in the U.S., Boston lightening up its restrictions on COVID. We'll take a look at this article from The Atlantic that is just so hilarious. I have to read the title and the conclusion, and we can't waste any more time because it's just so inane. From there, we're going to talk about a release on COVID vaccination and liver damage. We'll talk about how they're going to predict COVID mutations in the future. Then we'll break down this breaking news from the New York Times on the CDC. All good stuff. Let's dive on in. So a bunch of stuff happened in Canada over the last couple days, and we're going to get to all of it. But before we do that, I'm going to get to a quick mailbag question because we only had one question in the comment section this past week, and that's from D-Money, and it says, what happened to episode 33? Thank you for the question, D-Money. So episode 33 was actually published on Rumble. So I'm publishing on both Rumble and YouTube all the episodes that I can, but sometimes YouTube doesn't let me publish certain episodes for content in the episodes, and this happened to be one of them. So the episode title is The Science TM Strikes Back. It just so happens that this is one of my favorite thumbnails I made for all the episodes so far, and it's a parody of the poster that came out in the 80s for Star Wars Episode 5. So yeah, check it out on Rumble. Remember guys, I do a mailbag every week at the end of the week, and I do it from questions in the comment section, so get your questions in the comments. Now let's talk about Canada. So over the weekend, hundreds upon hundreds of armed police descended upon Ottawa. Specifically, they were targeting the trucker blockade, and among these police on the ground, they also had snipers on the rooftops. The images and videos were pretty chilling, so this is a video of just before the police moved in, and what it's going to show are trucker Canadians linking arms together, and then juxtaposed on the other side with police ready to move in. Predictably, when you're going to forcibly move somebody out, there has to be some sort of action, and it got violent. It got violent in some places. What's important to remember is that, these Canadians these truckers did not do anything violent themselves, right? So before this was instigated, there were bouncy houses, there were kids playing, and there was families around, and all these people that aren't the truckers are watching this. Do you think they're going to forget? Do you think these people are going to forget the actions that the Trudeau administration has done to Canadians? I don't think so. This is just brutal. It even got to the point where some of the Canadian forces were actually using guns first, to break into truckers' cars, guns pointed at them to remove them out of the vehicle. Guns. I mean, this is crazy. Now, I may have mentioned this last week, but I didn't really talk about it. I didn't really understand the implications. I do now, and we'll talk about it in a second here. But last week, or a couple of weeks ago, Ottawa fired their old police chief. And it was briefly mentioned in a bunch of BBC articles, and then it disappeared. Well, here's their new police chief, and listen to this interview.
I'm from independent media. So I was in the crowd yesterday. I was unfortunately hit with some pepper spray. I just have a question. There's some video cameras that the police are using, and some news outlets are reporting that you're gathering intelligence with those cameras. Can you elaborate, if the protesters at this point, retreat and go home, are they going to be getting sort of repercussions down the road, or are you going to be sort of actively pursuing the people that you've been sort of documenting and filming who are still out there protesting? What are your plans after this, after the protest is over?
Thank you. It's a great question. And the simple answer is yes. If you are involved in this protest, we will actively look to identify you and follow up with financial sanctions and criminal charges. Absolutely. This investigation will go on for months to come. It has many, many different streams, both from a federal financial level, from a provincial licensing level, from a criminal code level, from a municipal breach of court order, breach of court injunction level. It will be a complicated and time time-consuming investigation that will go on for a period of time. You have my commitment that that investigation will continue, and we will hold people accountable for taking our streets over.
And could I just ask one more question?
So the reporter basically says, if these truckers retreat, if they go home, are you going to pursue them? Are you going to charge them with all these things? The police officer says, yes, we're going to pursue and charge them. And when he says, he doesn't really say to the fullest extent of the law, but he's implying that. And that's scary because the new law is this Emergency Act, right? I don't actually know what the fullest extent of that law means and how far they're going to go down the rabbit hole. I mean, they're already, freezing people's funds and, basically doxing people that have contributed small funds to these truckers. So I don't really know the full implication of that, but now it's clear why the other police officer was removed, so they could get this guy in there. So the outcome is looking quite dire for these truckers and their movement in Ottawa right now. But what they've done for the rest of Canada has fully inspired them. Here's the Premier of Alberta, Jason Kennedy, speaking about how Alberta is going to take the Trudeau administration to court over the Emergency Act.
The federal government's invocation of the Emergencies Act is an unnecessary and disproportionate measure that can violate civil liberties, invades provincial jurisdiction, and creates a very dangerous but precedent for the future. And it's not necessary, as we've demonstrated here in Alberta at Coots and Ontario did at the Windsor Ambassador Bridge. Provincial law enforcement authorities are able to deal with illegal road blockades. And let's be clear, the rule of law must be applied. Law and order must prevail, regardless of the cause that people stand for. Folks in this country have the right peacefully and lawfully to protest. And I encourage people who feel strongly about vaccine mandates, public health restrictions, to do just that legally and peacefully. So the question then is, why does the federal government, using a power that is not necessary to seize bank accounts and assets, for example, from people arbitrarily, extrajudicially, without court orders based on their opinions or who they've donated to, power is really designed to interrupt things like terrorist financing. It doesn't make sense. That's why Alberta and 6 other provinces have spoken out against invocation of the Federal Emergencies Act. I've said that clearly to the Prime Minister a week ago. We've written to him underlining our reasons for opposing the Emergencies Act. And now I can announce that Alberta will be filing a court challenge to the Government of Canada's invocation of the Emergency Act. We will also be considering applying as an intervener to support the Canadian Civil Liberties Association and the Canadian Constitution Foundation. So we need to take action to defend, yes, the law and order, but also civil liberties and our Constitution in Canada. Alberta will be doing just that.
So this is from Alberta, but 6 other jurisdictions in Canada agree with Alberta. So that's really promising news. And they not only did they inspire the Canadian government in different locations, they've also continued to inspire the Canadian people. Here's a look at Calgary, Canada. So the spirit of Ottawa lives on, and I think this is going to be the pressure that Canada needs to make these changes ASAP. Now let's go to an interesting video from the Munich Security Conference in 2022 of Bill Gates discussing the vaccine and Omicron.
To kick off actually and get a bit of a scene setter from Mr. Gates, because this is, I know, a topic that you've spoken on again and again. You were ahead of the curve prior to the beginning of this pandemic. Where would you assess where we are today in beating COVID-19?
Well, sadly, the virus itself, particularly the variant called Omicron, is a type of vaccine. That is, it creates both B-cell and T-cell immunity, and it's done a better job of getting out to the world population than we have with vaccines. If you do surveys in African countries, you get well over 80% of people have been exposed either to the vaccine or to various variants. And so, what that does is it means the chance of severe disease, which is mainly associated with being elderly and having obesity or diabetes, those risks are now dramatically reduced because of that infection exposure.
So sadly, the virus itself, particularly the variant Omicron, is a type of vaccine. I wonder why that's a sad thing. You know, some people are giving him the benefit of the doubt and they're saying, well, he's saying it's sad that we couldn't get the vaccines out before Omicron went out to, you know, help people not get sick with vaccination versus getting infection. But I don't think that's what he's saying. And it's also interesting that he's saying all the things we've been saying for a long time here. You know, the actual risks of severe disease are in a particular population usually. It's usually obese, usually diabetic, usually elderly. He mentions all of that. And so only now are they mentioning this. And it's, you know, it's amazing to me how late to the game they are with announcing this and how now it's not misinformation. That just keeps baffling me. And I hope everybody that was saying that, you know, 10 months ago gets all their stuff back. I hope they get reimbursed for their time. I hope they get their jobs back. I hope they get their channels back for saying exactly what he's saying right now. Luckily for the rest of us, the Biden administration continues to extend the U.S. national emergency due to COVID-19 health risks. This is from Reuters. So President Joe Biden said on Friday that the U.S. national emergency declared in March of 2020 due to the COVID-19 pandemic will be extended beyond March 1st due to the ongoing risk to public health posed by the coronavirus. Biden said the deaths of more than 900,000 Americans from COVID-19 emphasized the need to respond to the pandemic with the full capacity of the federal government. Former President Donald Trump had declared a national emergency almost 2 years ago to free up $50 billion in federal aid. Well, we have in fact spent trillions on this, so the $50 billion was just nothing. But it's good to know that, you know, we're continuing this emergency lockdown. It's good to know. And, you know, one thing that's amazing to me, you know, real quick talking about Canada, how many Western government leaders have come out to denounce what Trudeau has done? I haven't heard one. I haven't heard of one Western leader come out and admonish President Trudeau. Also, breaking news over the weekend, Boston decides to lift their vaccine mandate for businesses, Mayor Wu announces. Now, if you remember, just last week we played a hilarious clip of Mayor Wu doing like an Instagram live thing about the coronavirus, and almost everybody was asking questions like, why are you ruining our city? When are the mandates going to be lifted? And they kept asking her this, and she just had no way out, which is one of the challenges that happens when you do anything live. But it was a total disaster zone. And so less than a week later, this happens, which is excellent. And of course, 100% based on the science, not on politics. Speaking about masks, The Atlantic came out with a hilarious article this morning, and it was in their health section, so that's great. And the article has changed names twice. The current name is Mask Mandates Are Illogical, So What? The name before that was Masks Mandates Don't Need to Make Sense. They only need to align with community goals. So that's a great title. Now, the link is in the description, so you guys can go read this article if you want to. I'm not going to waste too much time on it. I'm just going to read the last paragraph, which kind of summarizes the whole thing. I think that people have this expectation that everything has to be perfect as far as how the logic works together, Kirksell said, but no mandate is ever going to be perfectly consistent, and that's okay. Mask policies can still make sense so long as they serve a community's shared goals. So a couple of brief responses. One, it is an expectation for things to make sense. Yeah, that's an expectation. I don't understand why this guy thinks it's not an expectation. But to the title, mask mandates are illogical. So what? So we should stop. We should stop mandating them. If it's illogical, we should stop. If you can't prove how it makes sense to do what you're forcing people to do, maybe we shouldn't do it. You know, that's the whole thing. So it's amazing how in 2 years we've gone from don't get masks to just after that, everybody get masks. We told you not to because there's a shortage, but now please get them. And then over the course of 2 years, we've masked kids, we've masked everybody, we're still masking kids. It's not worked the entire time. Unless you're using very particular masks, it doesn't work. And now we're here, where even though it doesn't work, we're not going to admit we're wrong. We're just going to say that who cares if logic doesn't matter? Who cares? Who cares if it's not logical? We're just going to keep doing it because of a shared goal or something. The whole thing is crazy, and I don't know if they're ever going to admit they were wrong. And it is in fact important to admit you were wrong, to humble yourself before your audience so that they know you're at least trying to be honest with them. The more that they deny this, and this goes with the medical community as well, with the CDC, with the FDA, the more they continue to deny their wrongdoings during this process, the less people are going to trust them, the slower it's going to take to regain trust over time, if they can ever get all this trust back over time. All right, let's go to a couple studies. This first study it's kind of like an editor's note, and it's from the AASLD, which is the American Association for the Study of Liver Disease. This was published on February 17th, and the title is Liver Transplantation Following SARS-CoV-2 Vaccination Induced Liver Failure. So both this paper and the next paper are very jargon heavy. The links are in the description, so you guys can go read them if you want, but just be warned about that. So I'm going to try and choose parts that are a little easier to digest, and then I'll digest the more harder parts in the next paper for sure. But first, let's start with the beginning. So several case reports describe development of liver injury following SARS-CoV-2 vaccination in hepatology. These cases showed autoimmune hepatitis, AIH, features, and all the cases responded well to corticosteroid therapy. Herein we present a patient who underwent liver transplantation due to fulminant liver failure following vaccination with the BioNTech vaccine. So long story short, I'll read the ending here in a little bit, but basically this guy gets the Pfizer shot originally, and then he starts feeling kind of sick, so he goes to the doctor, and they find out he's got some inflammation in the liver. They treat it with corticosteroids, it goes down, everything's back to normal after a few weeks. Okay, good stuff. So then the guy has to travel for work, and in order to travel, he needs to be fully vaccinated. A full vaccine regimen at the time was 2 doses of Pfizer or Moderna or 1 dose of J&J. He was in Turkey, I believe, so he got the second dose of Pfizer. After the second dose, he presented with, again, some abdominal pains, so he goes to the ER, and now here's what they found. The liver biopsy showed portal inflammation with interface activity and significant lobular necroinflammatory activity, hepatocellular rosette formation, and emperiopoiesis that are typical components for AIH. Again, this is after the second shot. So treatment with prednisone, which was 40 milligrams per day intravenously, and plasma exchange did not improve liver function. The patient developed hepatic encephalopathy and underwent living donor liver transplantation. 1 month after the liver transplantation, he was alive and significantly improved laboratory findings. So they end by saying, we presented this first report of severe outcome of liver injury that developed after SARS-CoV-2 vaccination. We are aware that it is difficult to establish a definitive cause between SARS-CoV-2 vaccine and hepatitis. However, our case demonstrates strong evidence of vaccine-induced immune-mediated liver injury. The patient developed liver injury after a first dose of Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine, which no re-exposure led to severe liver injury. Our case, along with other reports, suggests that AIH, like hepatitis, may develop after SARS-CoV-2 vaccination. Early diagnosis and effective management seem to be very important in this emerging condition. So I couldn't have worded it better myself. It's great that they acknowledged, okay, we saw this thing. It happened in lots of cases in Turkey. We saw it, but we don't know for sure what's causing it. We just know that there's some sort of, it seems to be link between vaccination and this outcome. So if that's the case, we need to do further investigation. We've shown that, prednisone and early action seems to work really good. But in this particular case, it required a liver transplant. So all of this is good. What they're saying is we can't prove definitively what's doing it, but we know we see this. So let's keep investigating it. Good on them. We need to keep looking into it. We have to be giving people accurate safety information before they make decisions. So I was going to dive a little more into this article than I am, but I'm going to briefly mention it and go into 2 stories that came out just recently over the weekend from the New York Times and The Hill. So you can find this story in the description, or this article, sorry. It's really cool, and let me tell you what it's about. So the title of the article is Emerging Vaccine Breakthroughs, SARS-CoV-2 Variants, and it was published in the ACS Infectious Diseases Journal. So I'm going to read 2 quick clips from the abstract. So first of all, this is them speaking. We integrated the genotyping of 1,489,884 SARS-CoV-2 genomes, a library of 130 human antibodies, tens of thousands of mutational data, topological data analyses, and deep learning to reveal SARS-CoV-2 evolution mechanisms and forecast emerging vaccine breakthrough variants. Now, this team has proven previously that they were able to predict particular traits of mutation that were successful for the COVID virus. So that's really cool. But more importantly, here's the takeaway from this study. We show that prevailing variants can be quantitatively explained by infectivity strengthening and vaccine escape co-mutations on the spike protein RBD due to natural selection and or vaccination-induced evolutionary pressure. We illustrate that infectivity strengthening mutations were the main mechanism for viral evolution, while vaccine escape mutations become a dominating viral evolutionary mechanism among highly vaccinated populations. So what they're saying here is basically this. We know that all the viruses that we know so far behave and change and evolve through natural selection processes. That means the environment changes and they change with the environment basically, or the environment pressures them to change in a particular way. But what they're also saying is that mRNA vaccine induction into the population has artificially changed the environment, and that's allowing them to predict future variants. It's a super cool paper. It's very, very jargon heavy. The link is in the description. I recommend you guys check it out. But moving on to a couple of breaking stories from the New York Times and The Hill. This first article comes from the New York Times and it was published Sunday, February 20th. The title is, "The CDC isn't publishing large portions of the COVID data it collects. The agency has withheld critical data on boosters, hospitalizations, and until recently, wastewater analyses." So now even the New York Times isn't defending the CDC. This is huge news. Let's break down the article. The article starts off by talking about booster information. So when the CDC published the first significant data on the effectiveness of boosters in adults younger than 65 2 weeks ago, it left out the number for the huge portion of that population, 18 to 49 years old, the group least likely to benefit from extra shots because the first 2 doses already left them well protected. The agency recently debuted a dashboard of wastewater data on its website that will be updated daily and might provide early signals of an oncoming surge of COVID cases. Some states and localities have been sharing wastewater information with the agency since the start of the pandemic, but had never before released those findings. So without this booster data for 18 to 49-year-olds, the outside experts who federal agencies look for to advise had to rely on numbers out of Israel to make their recommendations on the shots. Kristen Norderlund, a spokeswoman for the CDC, said the agency has been slow to release the different streams of data because basically at the end of the day, it's not yet ready for prime time. She said the agency's priority when gathering any data is to ensure that it's accurate and actionable. Another reason she stated is fear that the information might be misinterpreted. Now there's a big word. The data might be misinterpreted by whom, and what do you mean by misinterpreted? The CDC is a political organization as much as it is a public health organization, said Samuel Scarpino, managing director of pathogen surveillance at the Rockefeller Foundation's Pandemic Prevention Institute. The steps that it takes to get something like this released are often well outside the control of many of the scientists that work at the CDC. This is a really good point. There's lots of things that the CDC has done in the past and currently does that aren't being, so politicized like COVID. The problem is the CDC's dug itself such a huge hole with their mishandling of COVID-19 that the rest of the otherwise good things that they do are being put on the hotspot of questioning their accuracy. And it's good to question accuracy, but they've lost all credibility in all sectors, whereas some of these other sectors used to be just quite reliable. You could have said, okay, yeah, this is a neutral study. It doesn't have anything to do with politics. Yeah, we can trust the data. Now even those are under question. So even though there's a lot of good scientists doing good work at the CDC, the whole organization's reputation has come crashing down thanks to the COVID-19 response. Continuing on through the article, the performance of vaccines and boosters, particularly in younger adults, is among the most glaring omissions in data the CDC has made public. Last year, the agency repeatedly came under fire for not tracking so-called breakthrough infections in vaccinated Americans and focusing only on individuals who became ill enough to be hospitalized or die. The agency presented the information as risk comparison with unvaccinated adults rather than provide timely snapshots of hospitalized patients stratified by age, sex, race, and vaccination status. But the CDC has been routinely collecting information since the COVID vaccines were first rolled out last year, according to a federal official familiar with the effort. The agency has been reluctant to make those figures public, the official said, because they might be misinterpreted as the vaccines being ineffective. Ms. Nodeland confirmed that as one of the reasons. Another reason, she said, is that the data represents only 10% of the population of the United States. But the CDC has relied on the same level of sampling to track influenza for years. Concerns about misinterpretation of hospitalization data broken down by vaccination status is not unique to the CDC. On Thursday, public health officials in Scotland said they would stop releasing data on COVID hospitalizations and deaths by vaccination status because of similar fears that the figures would be misinterpreted by anti-vaccine groups. And finally, we were at a much greater risk of misinterpreting the data with data vacuums than sharing the data with prior science communication and caveats, Mr. Rivera said. I agree completely. When the Delta variant caused an outbreak in Massachusetts last summer, the fact that 3/4 of those infected were vaccinated led people to mistakenly conclude that the vaccines were powerless against the virus, validating the CDC's concerns. But that could have been avoided if the agency had educated the public from the start that as more people are vaccinated, the percentage of vaccinated people who are infected or hospitalized would also rise, public health experts said. This story is huge from the New York Times. So first of all, in the misinterpretation of data, look, if you release the data, you defend your stance, let people look at it and critique it. If your defense isn't good enough to withstand criticism, then that's your problem. That should not be a reason to withhold data. That's a you problem in defending your own data. So that's a totally pathetic excuse for not releasing data, and they should be ashamed of themselves for saying that. But what's important is they actually admitted it. They admitted they withheld data. There's not going to be some sort of probe into the CDC now that is kind of offhand because, we're guessing. No, these guys have admitted that they have withheld data for the whole time. This is going to be investigated, and we'll see what comes of it, but this is a huge story of the New York Times. This is just further proof of how political COVID-19 is, especially with CDC, and how much the science actually matters. All right, so next time I'm going to get to the Hill article. I'm going to get to this ivermectin study released in JAMA. So we got a whole bunch of things to get to. But until then, thanks for listening. Have a great day. Please enjoy this video, and I'll see you guys a little later this week.
Yo, what's up, man?
I can't see shit.
Oh shit! Oh shit! Come on!
Yo, he's gonna make
Come
it
on,
up.
you got
He's
it!
gonna make it up.
You got it! Oh yeah! Let's go! Free the man! Let's go!